Now, live, a 22 News Decision 2014 gubernatorial debate with Republican Charlie Baker and Democrat Martha Coakley. And now, here's Barry Krieger.
And good evening. Welcome to tonight's 22 News debate between Massachusetts candidates for governor, Democrat Martha Coakley and Republican Charlie Baker. I would like to thank the candidates for coming to our studios to give Western Massachusetts voters a chance to hear where they stand on important issues. We will begin with a 1-minute opening statement from each candidate with the order determined by a drawing that has already taken place. We do have a lot of ground to cover tonight, and I am asking the candidates to please keep to your times. Martha Coakley, you will start it off. You have 1 minute.
So thank you very much, and welcome to our viewers tonight. I just wanted to mention that our thoughts certainly go out to Angela and Tom Menino tonight. And I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about why I'm running for governor. Having grown up in northern Berkshire County in the 50s into the mid-70s, I know exactly what happened when those shoe factories and mills started to close, when Sprague Electric and GE closed in Pittsfield. And when I saw that it was much harder to get good hospital care and to get good communication and good transportation, it's why I firmly believe that my economic development plan can help turn this economy around for everybody in Massachusetts and every region of Massachusetts, not just Boston and Cambridge, to make sure that we invest in early education and earned sick time and the education that kids need, good mental health and behavioral health care. And I know that if we put investments in our workforce and our kids, we can be prosperous and fair here in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Mr. Baker, you have 1 minute.
Well, good evening, and I want to thank you as well for hosting this evening's discussion, and I also want to send my thoughts and prayers to the Menino family on this particular evening. I'm running for governor because I believe state government needs to work better. It needs to work better for the taxpayers who pay the bills. It needs to work better for the people who work in state government. And it especially needs to work better for the people who depend on it every single day for a variety of services. And I think in many ways, what I bring to this table is a broad record with respect to serving in local government. I served in 2 successful administrations, the Bill Weld and the Paul Cellucci administrations, where we grew our economy by 500,000 jobs and went from having the highest unemployment rate in the country to the lowest unemployment rate over the course of that decade. I also spent years in the private sector turning around Harvard Pilgrim, which became the #1 ranked health plan in the country for the last 7 years I was there for customer service and member satisfaction. And I'm running in large part because I consider myself to be one of the lucky ones. I'm one of those folks who's benefited from the great things Massachusetts brings to the table every day, and I want everybody to have that opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Now, the first part of tonight's debate will be questions emailed to 22 News from our viewers. I will ask a question, and each candidate will have 1 minute to provide an answer. Again, this order was predetermined by a drawing in which representatives of both candidates were present. Our first question goes to Martha Coakley, and this is from Colleen in East Hampton, who asked about one of the biggest economic and social issues affecting Western Massachusetts, and we're talking about MGM's proposal to build a casino in Springfield South End. Colleen wants to know how you plan to vote on the casino law repeal question on the ballot, and if the gaming law is repealed, would you support a discussion to move forward with the casino in Springfield specifically, Ms. Coakley?
So thank you, Colleen, for that question. And I have said since this campaign began that I would not vote to repeal this gaming statute. And I've worked really closely, I think, to put together the statutory and regulatory oversight so that we can recognize the economic value and mitigate the social ills, making sure that we passed a money laundering statute, for instance, in Massachusetts. I know particularly for Western Mass that can be a key piece of a regional economic development plan. It's not the only thing that we need out here, but it can be successful. I do think we'll know, Colleen, on November 4th what the voters decide. But I have said, as I know my opponent has said, that I would consider looking at, even if it's repealed, some way to allow for, as part of a regional economic development plan, a casino to go forward here in Western Massachusetts.
Mr. Baker.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I also plan to vote no on the casino repeal question. I've actually walked the site in Springfield and had an opportunity to take a look at how that proposal was going to work here. And I must say, the idea of bringing that proposal to that part of Springfield, which was hit by the tornado, and creating that streetscape that's been talked about as part of this proposal, I think is one of the more innovative proposals I've seen. In addition to that, the idea of hooking it up with the Civic Center and making it possible for MGM to use its global reach to bring entertainment acts to the Civic Center and turn that into a showpiece as part of their empire, I think is a huge opportunity for this region. And while I do plan to vote no on that question, if the question does pass, I've said that I would like to revisit the Springfield proposal with the legislature and see if we can't move that forward.
All right. Our second question tonight is about job growth and economic creation, job creation and economic growth. Massachusetts' unemployment rate was at 6% last month, which is slightly higher than the national average. What are some examples of how you plan to improve the economy here in Massachusetts? And besides potential casinos, how do you specifically plan to create more jobs, and in what industries, Mr. Baker?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I've put out a very comprehensive and specific economic development plan. It's available on our website at charliebaker2014.com. I bring a couple of things up here. One is, I believe the way to do this is to build on the strengths in each region, that's where our opportunity to be successful is. And in this region, just to pick an example, there are 3,000 machinists working in the Pioneer Valley. It's a big part of the aerospace industry. The big issue people have out here is they can't find enough skilled people. I think Massachusetts, and I would do this as governor, needs to work aggressively with the local employers, the community colleges, and the Voc Tech schools to make sure that we have the skilled people to fill those jobs, because you can build quite a career there. I also think we need to clean up our regulatory environment. We're a very tough state to do business in. I hear that from small businesses. I hear it from mid-sized businesses. I hear it from all businesses. And I also don't think we should raise taxes. I think the voters and businesses in Massachusetts pay enough in taxes, and we need to hold the line there.
Mrs. Coakley.
So I have talked throughout this campaign about the importance and really the success of building a regional economic development plan, because I do think that the 4 western counties, for instance, have different interests and needs than Merrimack Valley or the South Coast. And being able to set aside $500 million over the next 10 years to invest in infrastructure, which we know has been ignored somewhat over the last tough recession, and allow for $100 million in competitive grants. So, for example, as Mayor Morse told me, he would use that to redo the Victory Theater, which I'm going to go visit tomorrow in Holyoke. I believe there's great opportunity out here for the return of precision manufacturing, for smart farming. I heard about a company that was looking in Lee, Massachusetts, for instance, to bring precision manufacturing back to one building and then buy another building for housing. And I think that's very exciting to be able to build a sustainable economy. But the piece that's really important is the workforce development. It's why I do support early education, increasing our aid to Voc Tech schools so that we can have the workforce to do those jobs.
All right. Western Massachusetts is, like the rest of the state and the country really, dealing with high demand and high prices for energy. Texas-based Kinder Morgan is seeking federal approval for a natural gas pipeline that would cut through at least a dozen western Massachusetts communities, not to mention a whole slice of the northern part of the state. Kinder Morgan says the pipeline would help New England meet its growing demand for natural gas, but we are hearing and seeing a lot of opposition to this in the different meetings that we've gone to, the public hearings. Our viewers want to know if you support the proposal to build a natural gas pipeline across our state, and what your plan is to deal with the rising cost of energy. You first.
Sure. Well, I have said I don't support that particular proposal. I don't think it's the right plan for Western Massachusetts. And I have been, for the last 8 years, the ratepayer advocate here, bringing back $700 million to consumers, changing the law so that when we recover monies, it does go back to people, holding the line on WMeco and Unitil and National Grid, even when they were trying to pass along consumers costs that they weren't entitled to. We have had, over the last 8 years, spikes in costs, and we are farther along than I think anybody thought we would be even 3 or 4 years ago in terms of moving away from coal to natural gas and increasing our ability to use alternative energy and develop clean and, frankly, good economic drivers with wind and solar. I believe that we have the opportunity now, and we need to address it with other states, and I will as governor, how we can apply and use the skills we have now to make sure that we have enough natural gas and continue to move towards energy efficiency and clean alternative energy.
All right, Mr. Baker.
Yeah, I think if the Attorney General and the administration have been aggressive about dealing with this natural gas issue over the course of the previous 4 years, we might not have to talk about the Kinder Morgan proposal. I also don't support the Kinder Morgan proposal, but I also think we need to recognize that the big reason why people's electricity bills are going to go up by 30, 40, maybe even 50% this winter is because we didn't, as a Commonwealth, approve the expansion of our existing natural gas pipelines, simply taking them from 3 feet in diameter to 4 feet in diameter, which would have made it possible for us to continue to access domestically produced, clean-burning natural gas. I'm also a big fan of the Canadian Hydro Project, which I've talked about for many years, and I'm glad to see the New England governors, including Governor Patrick here in Massachusetts, moving ahead with that particular proposal. That's one where the New England governors ought to work together, because that does create a huge opportunity to generate clean, sustainable, renewable, and competitively priced energy for people throughout New England, including here in Massachusetts.
All right. Our next question comes from West Springfield. We received several viewer questions on this topic. There are 1,850 families living in homeless hotels here in Massachusetts. More than 450 of them are living in Hampden and Franklin counties alone, and these are new numbers that we just received today. The state has paid $4 million to house these families just this year alone. Governor Patrick's June deadline to have all the homeless families out of the hotels and into permanent housing has come and gone. What are your plans to get families out of these homeless hotels? And can you give a hard date as to when you would accomplish this, Mr. Baker?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question, because when I joined the Weld administration in 1991, there were 1,400 families living in hotels and motels in Massachusetts, which we called a human tragedy. And working with local housing authorities, local housing developers, community development corporations, and others, over the course of 18 months, we brought that number down to 0, getting those families and those children back into the communities they were from, where they had most of their supports. And that number stayed at 0 for a very long period of time. I was dismayed to see that number go up as it has over the course of the past few years. And last December, we put out a comprehensive proposal to take that number back down to 0, again, doing the kinds of things that we did in the early 90s to get people back in the communities they belong in, where their supports are, and to help them find their ways into work and self-sufficiency. And I would love to have an opportunity to do that again as governor. The number total statewide is now approaching 2,500. I think it's an outrage in every way you could possibly describe it, and it'll be a very high priority for me, having done it once before.
Ms. Coakley?
Well, I think the number is down to 1,800, and we know particularly in Holyoke and Chicopee the numbers are almost near 200, 150, 200, and Springfield has a large number also. I've heard this as I've traveled around the state. It's unacceptable. We have too many families, and frankly too many kids, who are moving from hotels. They don't have stability, and it is expensive. And certainly looking at some of the root causes of why this is true, one of it is people have lost their homes to a foreclosure crisis. We have people who have been evicted, been foreclosed upon, so we are needing to address that issue. And we also have issues around serious mental health and other issues that cause people to be homeless, but particularly for children. It's got to be a priority to work with local communities, identify that number, get at those root causes, and make sure that we're able to, as soon as possible, get these families stable in affordable, either rental or other housing in Massachusetts.
All right, staying along the lines of the Department of Transitional Assistance, we received a lot of emails about EBT and welfare fraud. State Auditor's Office identified more than $9.5 million in public assistance fraud just in the last fiscal year. There were more than 800 cases of individuals defrauding the state of food stamps, child care services, health care benefits, and cash assistance. A 22 News I-Team investigation found people taking EBT money out at strip clubs, pawn shops, the IMAX Theater in California, and Universal Studios, Florida. What will you do to crack down on the theft of taxpayer dollars and abuse through fraud? Ms. Coakley, you first.
Well, let me just say, I firmly believe that I don't want kids going hungry. I don't want people going without assistance when they need it. But I also don't have much tolerance for people who cheat the system. And I frankly have a record of going after convenience stores that have been engaged in EBT fraud. That's how it happens. We have held them accountable. We got a jail sentence on a convenience store owner. And I say going forward, anybody who's involved in that kind of fraud, facilitating that kind of fraud, shouldn't have a lottery license, shouldn't be able to sell alcohol and tobacco, so we can crack down on that. I also have gone after individuals who have been collecting unemployment while they're working. And I'm going to continue to make sure that we don't have acceptance for people who flout the rules, have better oversight and accountability for that. We need to do that, and I understand that. That's the work I've been doing as Attorney General, and I'll work with the Auditor and the Inspector General to make sure that we do that.
All right, Mr. Baker.
You know, I hear a lot about this when I'm out on the campaign trail, and I hear it a lot from working families, mostly in cities. And it's one of those things where they basically say, I get up every morning, I work one job, I work two jobs, I play by the rules, I do the right thing. And then I see story after story associated with people defrauding the system. I got no problem with people who are entitled to benefits, accessing benefits and using them in the appropriate way. But we clearly have work to do here, and the people on Beacon Hill who think we've accomplished our objectives on this are simply mistaken. And some of the things we probably ought to consider doing going forward in addition to what's been done. And by the way, this is a great example of bipartisan reform. There have been a series of initiatives over the course of the past several years, Republicans and Democrats working together to address many of these issues. But we still have a long way to go on this issue to truly be successful and to basically be in a position where we can look those working families in the eye that I've talked to over the course of this campaign and say we're doing everything we can.
All right. It is no secret that our roads and bridges are in bad shape, and we all know it costs a lot of money to fix roads. We are seeing the need to repair roads now more than ever here in the western part of the state. One of our area's busiest sections of highway is that elevated section of I-91 through Springfield. They call it the viaduct. It is literally crumbling through decay. At times, they've had to close the parking lots below the highway because of the concrete falling on the parked cars or avoid that, and that's no exaggeration. What are your plans to improve infrastructure, specifically here in the western part of the state, and how do you plan to pay for it? Mr. Baker, you first.
Well, the I-91 project is one that the Department of Transportation is currently moving forward on. They're doing the preliminary studies on that, and it's one that I support. And we'll move forward as governor to make happen. I think and by the way, there are also opportunities to incorporate some of the work associated with building the casino into sort of the redirection of that interchange as well, and make it possible to bring some of the waterfront back to the city, which I think is an important objective there as well. One of the other things I would say about this is that project in particular, I believe we'll be able to get significant federal funding to support, and it will be right on the top of my to-do list because it should have happened a long time ago, and it should get done, and it will get done in a Baker administration.
Ms. Coakley.
Well, it should get done, but it's not the only thing that needs to get done because we've not had the opportunity over the last several years with the recession. And frankly, we talked about it during this campaign, but a lot of projects got put on hold because of big dig financing that my Republican opponent was involved in. And so it is time to invest and make funds available because we're not going to have the economic turnaround that we want. It's why I do support the indexing of the gas tax, as do the Mass Taxpayers Association, most businesses and business leaders in Massachusetts, because they know we need that predictable way to move forward on projects like the South Coast Rail, on fixing our roads and bridges, and frankly, increasing our public transit. And so if we are going to do that, we need those funds. And I certainly support that particular project, the I-91 viaduct. We talked about it a lot out here, but there are a lot of other work that needs to be done, not just in Springfield, Holyoke, and Chicopee, but around the state.
All right, that will complete the first part of our 22 News Candidates debate, the viewers' questions. In just a moment, Ms. Coakley and Mr. Baker will put questions directly to each other, one-on-one. Stay with us.
You're watching a 22 News Decision 2014 gubernatorial debate with Charlie Baker and Martha Coakley. Here's Barry Krieger.
And welcome back to the 22 News debate between candidates for Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker and Martha Coakley. The second part of tonight's debate will be one-on-one, Lincoln Douglas style. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask their opponent a question. You'll have 1 minute to answer, and then there will be 30 seconds for rebuttal. Again, I must ask you, in fairness, to please keep to your times. Mr. Baker, you have 30 seconds to pose your first question to Ms. Coakley.
Thank you very much. You know, we've had a good exchange of ideas during the first part of this debate, so I'd actually like to ask a slightly different kind of question. I know I certainly love this state, and I know you do too, and the campaign has brought me to some of the greatest places in the Commonwealth. I'm curious to know which campaign stop of yours might stand out most in your mind.
Oh boy, we've been on the trail since last September, my husband and I. He's here with me tonight. And I have to say that the times in which I'm able to stop and talk with people in diners and talk to people one-on-one about not just what I want, but what they are looking forward to in the next governor. I think I've met people who are very optimistic about where we're going. I think they're concerned, obviously, but I think they feel the economy is turning around and they just want to get a fair shot. I really enjoy the one-on-one conversations with people and the ability to see what people's hopes and dreams are for them and for their kids. And it's what's exciting me about running for governor.
All right. You have about 30 seconds for rebuttal.
All right, well, I thought I might just pick a place in Springfield since we're here. I visited the Veritas Prep Charter School, which is a middle school founded and run by Rachel Romano, who's a real powerhouse. She was a teacher in the Springfield school system who decided she wanted to do something a little different. And the thing that made this such an interesting visit was her school is located in a nursing home. She drove by the nursing home and somehow she saw a middle school in it, and they're doing great, and it's a terrific school. And I just remember thinking to myself, we have so many clever, imaginative, creative, and great people in this state.
I think I just learned something tonight about my region. Ms. Coakley, you have 30 seconds to ask a question to Mr. Baker.
Sure. Charlie, you've chosen Karen Polito as your running mate, and although she's been implicated in an ethics scandal involving her campaign donors and family who got special access to collector plates intended for the public, she's praised the Tea Party and the standard bearer, Alan West. She has A listings from the NRA. Do you agree with Karen Polito's Tea Party philosophy, and if not, can you name one thing that you absolutely disagree with her about?
You know, it's funny, the little rumors that get started about people in public life, which I'm sure our Attorney General knows as well as anybody, and I do as well. If you look at Karen Polito's voting record, it's what I would describe as your classic Massachusetts Republican voting record. She had a 100% rating from NARAL. She voted for the health care reform law. She voted to support the override of Governor Romney's veto on stem cell research. She voted for the regional green energy bill. She voted for the clean energy bill. Karen is a terrific campaigner and a great public servant, and as is often the case in politics, people put all kinds of labels on people that don't mean anything. They don't apply to her.
Well, she does have 100% or an A-list rating from the NRA. So I take it by your answer, Charlie, you mean that you are in sync with Karen and there's nothing you disagree with her about.
Oh no, look, let's face it, Karen and I agree on many things. We don't agree on things. But she and I both supported the legislation that was passed most recently during the legislative session on gun control for a number of reasons. One was it finally brought Massachusetts in line and connected us to the National Mental Health Registry, which we needed to be connected to on background checks. It expanded and increased the penalties for gun crime here in Massachusetts, which was important. And it also created the first task force to deal with illegal gun trafficking, which is something that's a big problem in many places, especially out here.
Ms. Coakley, you have 30 seconds for a question to Mr. Baker.
Sure. Charlie, you have spent time in state government. You mentioned that early tonight. You've said that you've enjoyed it. It's one of the reasons that you're running for governor. But under your time as undersecretary and secretary, didn't you eliminate 700 workers at the Department of Mental Health and then underfund the private contractor that you outsourced the core of some of those services to? And I guess my question would be, what do you say to those 700 people who lost their jobs, or the thousands of people at that time who were forced to wait for critical mental health care?
You know, that was one of the things I heard over and over from people during the transition that year was how much we needed to do something about reforming our mental health system and finding ways to get people who belonged in the community out of decrepit and in some cases dangerous state institutions and into more appropriate community-based settings. The advocacy community was looking for that, and so were many other folks involved in the mental health patient movement. So we created a commission, a bipartisan commission, Democrats and Republicans, leaders in the field, 18 members who voted 17-1 to move forward on a plan to consolidate our facility system and actually maximize the way we used a number of the state facilities. For example, Tewksbury ended up significantly expanding its footprint and creating a significant number of jobs at Tewksbury to take over the inpatient services that had been provided previously in Danvers. And we also created thousands of jobs in the community for people as well. And we did the right thing by creating home and community-based opportunities for many people with mental illness who actually belonged in the community.
You have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, Charlie, I beg to differ because to disagree, that's actually not what the record shows. And that 60% of the funds at most were committed to people who did need outsourced services, they needed community services. You lost 700 jobs, you fired 700 people, and didn't provide the concomitant services that people needed in their communities, and we are still to this day living with some of the vestiges of that.
20 years later, and for most part,
is this your question?
No, I mean, 20 years later, for the most part, the system that we built and put in place on a bipartisan basis during that period is still operating today. Does it have flaws? Can it be improved on? You bet. 17-1, that commission, Democrats and Republicans and leaders in the field voted to support that plan. That's the way you create consensus and move forward on reform.
I'm going to go with that as your question. If you want to rebut that.
Yeah, well, I think that that idea of taking those jobs and putting them into the community didn't really compensate for what people needed. And you can talk about the bipartisan commission, but it is still about what we need to do to make sure if we're going to deinstitutionalize people, what supports we provide for them. And to me, it doesn't include cutting jobs and not giving people the support they need in the community.
We're getting a little confused here, so what would you like to do, Mr. Time Cop?
You can rebut what she just said to you, and then Ms. Coakley has the next question.
So I kind of blew it with respect to my question.
Yeah, well, it's our format, I suppose.
Okay.
We're trying to keep to the format.
Well, why don't you just let her go ahead and ask a question,
All
and
right.
then we can go from there.
So we're next is Ms. Coakley. You have a question.
Okay, well, I'll keep on my theme then. So let's talk about Harvard Pilgrim, because we know that you had a tough turnaround job to do. But when you were at Harvard Pilgrim, you eliminated thousands of jobs. There were 3,500 seniors out in Western Massachusetts who were taken off Medicare, who didn't have that. And you increased premiums by 150% and saw your salary raised to $1.7 million. In a not-for-profit, Charlie, why did you think it was okay to accept a huge raise while making decisions with such a negative impact on so many families?
You know, I took the job at Harvard Pilgrim to save thousands of jobs, which is exactly what happened here in the Commonwealth of Mass. Harvard Pilgrim went into receivership shortly after I took the job running that organization, and everybody knew it was going to go into receivership because it was in the process of losing $200 million. And we had to make some tough decisions to rescue it. They were tough. In fact, I said in the first debate that the toughest decision I've ever made as a person, as a professional, was removing our operation in Rhode Island. But we made sure everybody who was in active treatment continued to have active treatment and transition. We made sure everybody who worked for us who lost their job got outplacement counseling, and the vast majority of them got jobs. And we made sure that everybody we owed money to got paid. And we saved that company, and we saved thousands of jobs at Harvard Pilgrim, thousands of jobs at Harvard Vanguard, and thousands of jobs in Eastern Massachusetts. And most importantly of all, we also protected and preserved health care coverage for millions of people in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. And some of your most significant supporters, Attorney General, are big fans of what we did and what we accomplished.
Well, then I have 30 seconds then in our format. So let me just respond then. By 2006, Harvard Pilgrim had essentially been stabilized and turned around. Your salary was at $1.5 million, and you made a decision to send at least 200 jobs to India. How do you justify that, getting rid of those jobs and outsourcing, and getting an outsourcing award in excellence?
Okay, we never sent any jobs to India, just FYI. Okay.
All right, we got to go with the question next that you have from Ms. Coakley.
Well, this is sort of an interesting question given our previous conversation. You've criticized the decisions I've made to save Harvard Pilgrim, and those criticisms have been rejected by many people in the media and even some of your most significant supporters. Governor Patrick has made similarly tough budget decisions, making hundreds of millions of dollars in emergency cuts to the state budget. Those cuts included laying off thousands of state employees and cuts to services for seniors, the homeless, DCF, and mental health care. Did you object to those cuts when they were made? And do you think those decisions mean Governor Patrick doesn't have the right kind of character to be a good governor?
So, Charlie, in fairness, I've been part of that system, and I have suffered those 22C cuts. We've done that voluntarily. We tried to spread it among the people I had control of, so nobody got fired, nobody got laid off. We went through, at the time Governor Weld was there, when everybody had to take a furlough, and we all suffered through that time period. I understand it. What I'm talking about, though, are vital services for people who are mentally ill, seniors who need medical care, those people who don't have any other options. And I still think that when you talk about 200 jobs that your subcontractor then outsourced to India at a time when Harvard Pilgrim had been turned around, they're not decisions I would have made. They impact those families and people negatively.
You have a rebuttal.
There was a lawsuit filed against the Commonwealth that raised some pretty significant questions about the quality of care at DCF in 2010. Governor Patrick cut the DCF, which was obviously a lawsuit that you were quite familiar with. Governor Patrick, to balance the budget, cut the DCF budget by $40 million that spring. Did you say anything about the fact that he was cutting the budget by $40 million at the point in time when you knew there were significant issues in service delivery at DCF?
Yeah, Charlie, I've talked for a long time, since I worked in the child abuse unit when Governor Weld was there and budgets got cut.
We have to go to Mr. Baker's next question. I think I got a little out of order here, so I'm going to try and get back on track and on format.
Okay.
I didn't mean to catch you
So
unawares.
who's next? Who's asking the next question?
This would be you.
Okay.
Question for you.
Okay.
For Ms. Coakley.
Over the last 7 years, state aid to our cities and towns has been cut by $400 million in order to pay for increases in state spending. Over the same time, the state budget has increased by almost $10 billion. As a former local official, I've made a pledge in this campaign to end the cuts to local aid, to not support any more unfunded mandates on our cities and towns, and to increase local aid as state revenue increases. I know that our cities and towns will use those dollars to invest in teachers, first responders, property tax relief for our families and seniors.
Is there a question?
Is there a question?
I'm wondering why you haven't made the same pledge.
Because I have talked during this campaign, through the primary and through the general, about the very much important issues of looking at our Chapter 70 foundation and making sure that the quality of a kid's education doesn't depend on the zip code that they're in. Investing in early education, by the way, for kids who can't get it now. Making sure that we invest in the STEM technology and the curriculum that our kids need for those jobs of tomorrow. And I've talked with mayors around the state about the need to make sure that we level the playing field for them, because we're all coming out of this tough recession based upon a Wall Street that gambled with our money. And my economic plan gives all that discretion in the local regions to mayors and others to say, this is what is going to help us restore what we need to do here in our cities and towns.
This question about local aid and state tax revenue, it was the first question the Mass Municipal Association asked every candidate for governor at their forum back in January. They said it was their #1 concern. And I came out and supported it because I think we can't be great partners to our Commonwealth cities and towns if we don't share the growth in state tax revenue with them. We will not be a great state starving our communities.
I don't.
All right, Ms. Coakley, at this point you have to either ask your question.
All right, fair enough.
This is our format.
So,
Although I'm
I'm
enjoying the give and take.
We need to behave, okay.
all right.
I'm going to ask everybody to stick to their times, please.
Okay.
30 seconds for a question.
Sure. So, Charlie, this is important to me, and I think it is to voters also. You are currently the subject of an ongoing pay-to-play investigation and violation of that rule involving the Republican Governor Chris Christie, who's head of the National Republican Governors Association. That association has spent already $8 million in this race, including 70% of that negative against my candidacy. You've refused to require the release of the investigation report until after the election so that voters could know whether you violated that law or not. And more importantly and more simply, you've refused to turn over your employment contract with your employer.
We need the question part.
Which would resolve the question. Why should people trust you when you won't make it clear that you're not involved in the appearance or a conflict of interest in this important issue?
You know, I've been completely transparent on this issue from the beginning. I hired the former general counsel of the Federal Election Commission when this issue was raised. I gave him my employment contract and all the documentation associated with this and said, if there's anything I need to do to correct what's happened here, let me know. He wrote me a very long and very detailed response to that, which I made available to the public, that said I didn't need to take any corrective action. He didn't believe I violated any statutes. I also released my tax returns, thereby letting everybody know exactly what my relationship was with General Catalyst. And I've controlled what I can control, and I consider the matter, for all intents and purposes, to be resolved on my end. You, of all people, know that it takes a long time to do investigations. I'm sure that when that investigation is finished, it will be released, and I'll look forward to seeing it just as much as everybody else will.
Well, in some ways it looks a little bit like pay to play and then delay, but as far as I'm concerned, Charlie, you could easily resolve this question by turning over your employment contract. And why in 2012, when you were supporting Scott Brown, you insisted that Elizabeth Warren should turn over her employment contract on an issue of much less significant to voters? Why is it different for her than for you?
I don't ever remember doing that, but the simple fact is I've turned all the documentation I believe I can turn over and made it public.
I'm going to have to go. You have to call it right
there. Want me to ask another question?
Please do.
Okay.
It's your turn.
Okay. Education is something that we've both talked a lot about during the course of this race, and it's something I would obviously make a top priority as governor. Right now there are 8 level 1 and level 2 elementary schools in Springfield, which means they perform significantly above the statewide average. Why do you think there are no level 1 or 2 middle schools or high schools in Springfield, and what do you think we could do about that?
I think that as we look at the levels of education that we have available now, my goal has been, and I've said clearly, that I do want every kid to get the best education regardless of their zip code. And I know that because of the forfeiture crisis and because cities and towns are struggling, because the state isn't playing a role with Chapter 70 foundation money, that we need to step that up. But I also think that what's important, Charlie, is that as we see what we've seen from our charter schools and extended learning time, investing in early education, giving kids the opportunity to do well, doing that science, technology, engineering, math, and art and music, I think is important, that we should be working to get those practices into every community. I don't think you and I disagree with this. I'm just willing to invest in it, and I think you just talk about it.
You have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Maybe I was a little too nuanced in the question I was asking. There are a lot of good elementary schools in Springfield. What seems to be the issue is what happens in middle school and in high school. One of the things we need to do is model some of the work that's being done in the elementary schools here, which clearly is succeeding in educating kids in many difficult circumstances, and make what's working there more readily available and accessible to folks in the middle and the high school. One of the things we don't do enough of in education generally is scale best practices and model what works. And I think Springfield would be a great place to pursue that, because they do have some good schools here.
Ms. Coakley, it's your turn for a question.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about the Big Dig, Charlie, because that is something that you were involved with while you were in government. And frankly, when I came in as Attorney General, it was one of the first things I had to deal with straightening out. On August 26, 1998, you were the top budget chief at the time. You wrote a memo that said that the rate of Big Dig spending was, quote, amazing, and that it threatened the spending in every part of the state thereafter because it was so high. You also said in that memo, though, don't tell the public about the runaway spending and the draconian cuts until after the election for your boss, the re-election for your boss.
Read the question.
Yep. How do you justify hiding this information for the public for political purposes?
That was a planning memo. Organizations write planning memos. It's one of the most important things you can do when you're dealing with a difficult topic. In that particular planning memo, what I was laying out was a series of choices that Governor Cellucci, if he were to be reelected, was going to have to deal with. And my view on that, I wrote dozens of planning memos in the summer of every single year during that administration. And the reason I wrote memos during the summer of every single year was because you wanted to start planning and discussing what you were going to do with the coming new year. That was nothing more than one more planning memo, just like many others. And I've heard a lot of stuff about the Big Dig over the course of my 2 campaigns now for governor. a project, by the way, which started when I was in college and ended long after I got out of government. The project financing that I put in place, working with the Clinton administration and with the legislature led by Democrats, worked. And it was exactly the same kind of project financing that Governor Patrick used to fund his accelerated bridge reconstruction program, which everybody really seems to like.
And you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, for many of us, and I'm not alone, that was a funding project that kicked the can down the road that we're still paying the price for now. And the memo said specifically, do not let the public know about this until after the election. So I don't think that's transparency when you have the opportunity to be transparent with the public about what the effects on our spending on infrastructure were going to be as a result of the way the Big Dig was financed.
All right, Mr. Baker, you have a question for Ms. Coakley.
I do. Thank you.
I knew you would.
Throughout the campaign, you've routinely said that you're open to increasing taxes like the income tax and the sales tax and the gas tax. And to be fair, you've also cited investing in a number of programs, about $1.5 billion worth of investments. I oppose more tax increases because I worry about the burden they'll put on already stressed family budgets, as well as the detrimental effect they'll have on creating jobs. It's clear you don't believe we're taxing enough right now, and with that position in mind, how much would be enough if you're governor?
Well, Charlie, the completely disingenuous in terms of the assumptions you've made. You and I shared the stage last week. I have said I hope taxes go down. I've never said I will raise taxes. And you, by the way, although you did in 2010, have taken no new taxes pledge here this time around. And you talk about a lot of investments. But to my positions, I agree with you that as the economy increases and moves up, we will see the income tax go down to 5%. I agree with that. And I also believe that as we look at, and I've talked about this, increased efficiencies on the way we deliver services, providing more mental health up front, for instance, rather than waiting till people are in a very expensive house of correction. I believe there are lots of ways that we can cut costs and deliver services better to people. The only thing I've said is that if the legislature and the people of Massachusetts want to make investments, then I would look to do it in a way that does not impact the middle class or those who can least afford it. I've never said I will raise taxes, and I believe right now that I hope we don't have to.
Mr. Baker, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
I guess I'd say two things. One is you have said you support the automatic increase in the gas tax, which will go up every year forever without anybody ever having to vote on it again. I don't support that, not because I'm opposed necessarily to some increase at some point, but because I think the legislature should have to stand up and vote if they want to raise taxes and then be held accountable at the voting box. And yes, I have taken a pledge not to raise taxes. I haven't signed a no new taxes pledge because I do want to be able to simplify the tax code if we have the ability to do it. But I think it's pretty clear to voters that I don't want to raise taxes, and you've said that you will.
All right, Ms. Coakley, you have 30 seconds to ask a question. Another one.
Sure. Charlie, I support earned sick time for every worker because I think no one should have to choose between having a job, going to a job, or losing it because they have a sick child or they themselves are sick. So my question to you is, you put out a plan that would support some sick time but still leaves 1.2 million people in Massachusetts without any earned sick time. I guess my question to you is, as CEO at Harvard or indeed at any job, I assume you've always had earned sick time, and why should people who have less financial opportunities than you have to be treated differently in this area?
Like you, I support earned sick time, but I do worry about the impact on very small businesses associated with a one-size-fits-all policy. There are only 2 other states in the country that actually have an earned sick time policy statewide. One is Connecticut and the other is California. And the state of Connecticut, and both of them have far more flexibility for small businesses and exemptions for certain kinds of businesses than this law does here in Massachusetts. I made a proposal on this issue that I think will do a better job of covering the vast majority of people without creating disruption and unintended consequences here in the Commonwealth for people. I also worry a lot about many of those businesses that operate informal flex programs where they basically put sick time, personal time, vacation time together into one package and basically make that the way they provide flexibility to their workers. Under this particular proposal, I think many workers in existing firms are going to lose something they already have that works for them.
Well, so Charlie, if the voters do agree with me that it's only fair to provide everybody earned sick time, and they pass that,
Yep.
will you implement that and respect that decision by
You bet.
voters?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in the initiative petition process.
All right, next is Mr. Baker. You have a question for Ms. Coakley.
Now I have to find one.
All right.
Okay, I found one. Thank you. As Governor Patrick's term ends, he made an 11th hour decision to reclassify 500 management appointees into a government employee union. This move will guarantee they can't be replaced by the next administration and will be eligible for 3% raises in the next 2 years. It's anticipated to cost the state about $500,000. Originally, you said you had no problem with it, but then the other night during our debate, you changed your mind. I'd like to know why you changed your mind with respect to that decision, and will you call on Governor Patrick right now to be more transparent about this?
So, Charlie, let's be fair about what I said and what I didn't say. I did not get involved in that negotiation. I still don't know exactly what the circumstances are and what that means in terms of cost to the government. I haven't said I've okayed that. And I do believe that those are kinds of decisions that the governor should be transparent about until and unless we get the transparency. And I think he should be, because I do think voters are owed exactly what that was. I know this has been an issue on the table for a long time, but I just don't think you should quote me according to what your talking points are as opposed to what I actually said.
Why don't you do that with me too? I think the most interesting thing about that particular issue was it came out originally, you said that's a gubernatorial decision, I don't have a problem with that. And then the other night during the debate, you said you thought you did have a problem with it, you were concerned about the transparency. I guess I would just ask you the original question, which is, will you call on the governor right now to be more transparent and to put out there exactly what happened and who's affected by it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done that, and I would do that, of course.
All right, it's time for your question to Mr. Baker.
Okay. So, Charlie, back in 2010, you seem to be still focused on cutting jobs, and this was something that you talked about in 2010 as a linchpin of some of the reforms you would bring to state government. You said that at that time, in the midst of one of the worst recessions we were engaged in, that you would fire 5,000 people if you were elected governor, as there was a cornerstone of your campaign. So what do you say to people who might think now that one of your first instincts as a manager, whether in business or in private sector, is to come in and to try and fire people and outsource?
I'm very proud of the work I did when I was in state government, and I'm very proud of the work I've done in my other settings during my professional career. And in most of the cases I've been involved in, unless I had to make very difficult decisions, which sometimes leaders are required to make very difficult decisions, similar to the ones that Governor Patrick had to make during the fiscal crisis here in the Commonwealth, I've been able to grow jobs and to save jobs and create economic opportunity. One of the things I'm proudest of during my time at Harvard Pilgrim is for the last 7 years I was there, Harvard Pilgrim was rated as the best place to work in Boston every single year. I think state workers are terrific. I know many of them. I talk to them all the time. What they tell me they want more than anything right now is active, aggressive leadership from the governor's office every single day so that they can have the kind of guidance and the kind of support that they need to do the important work they do on behalf of the people of this state, and I'm prepared to give it to them.
And you think that the people, that the 700 DMH workers who were let go and fired when you came in would say the same thing to you?
We gave all those folks as much outplacement as we possibly could, but as I said previously, that bipartisan commission made a recommendation, which I thought was a good one, to consolidate the state's facility system. And by the way, a lot of the folks who worked at Danvers were able to transfer over to Tewksbury, which was a good thing. And we created many jobs in the community as well as we moved folks from institutions they didn't belong in. Remember, the first
I'm gonna have to call it at this point.
All right.
But it is time for another question from you.
Thank you, sir. Yesterday, this is sort of a follow-up in some respects to one of yours. Yesterday, the mayor of Chicopee told me about the tragic situation of homeless families in his city and how the state has failed to address this situation. Nearly a year ago, I put out a plan to help homeless families and address the tragedy of thousands of homeless families in hotels and motels here in Massachusetts. What the hell am I doing? My plan followed up on the work I did in the Weldon Cellucci administrations that won awards from national homeless advocates and got every homeless family out of hotels and motels. So far, I don't think you've released a plan to address this problem.
The question?
Specifically, what would be your plan?
Well, I actually just addressed this earlier when the question came in from one of the audience members, and we've talked about it extensively, at least in the primary, because I think all the Democratic primary candidates for governor agreed. This is not acceptable, and I've talked about getting at root problems, getting vouchers for people, planning in those communities. I know Chicopee has 160 families right now. Holyoke has 195 families who are homeless. That is crisis for them and for their children, and I would work, and I said earlier tonight, I'd work with the mayors, I'd work with those communities to move those families as quickly as possible to stable, affordable housing with state help if we need it, but most importantly to also deal with underlying issues like mental health issues and substance abuse that often complicate these circumstances.
30 seconds for rebuttal.
Most important thing you need to do to solve this problem is you need to have case managers day after day after day working directly with these families to figure out what their issues and their problems and their circumstances are. And then those case managers need to work directly with the folks back in the communities that these people are from, with the public housing folks and the housing development people and the community development people to find opportunities and availability for housing and homelessness, home services on these people. The biggest single issue you have to do here is you have to be an active.
We're really getting down to it. And Ms. Coakley, you have this will be the final question.
The last question. Okay. Charlie, you've said that you don't like the indexing of the gas tax. Without this, which is projected to generate billions in transportation funding over the next decade, how do you propose to fund critical transportation projects like the I-91 viaduct, increase commuter rail to Boston, which you said you support the South Coast Rail, and greater funding for local regional transportation authorities, which we know we need? Where does that come from?
In my economic development plan, I talked about establishing what I call a pay-as-you-go fund for basic repairs, maintenance, and state of good repair transportation spending. Massachusetts shouldn't be borrowing money to pay for basic repair and state of good repair services. That's the sort of thing that families and others would pay for out of their operating budget. And my proposal is to put $25 million in the first year, 50 in the second, 75 in the third, and 100 in the fourth, and then to stay at that 100 going forward to fund those basic maintenance, repair, and state of good repair services. We shouldn't be borrowing money to pay for that stuff. That was a bad habit we got into as a Commonwealth. We should be funding that stuff out of general fund. And frankly, if you do it my way, I think in the short term and probably in the long term, you get a better result than you do just raising the gas tax on drivers and businesses every year here in the Commonwealth with no accountability.
Well, that's a bad habit is one we got into in the big dig financing, frankly, and your proposal doesn't allow then for paying for South Coast Rail. If you're just talking about that, you know the priorities in the state for just fixing infrastructure are going to take up all of that amount of money. You're not going to be able to do new public transit under that proposal.
The notion that somehow South Coast Rail has to have an automatic gas tax inflator in it for it to work is simply a red herring, and I would hope that people of southeastern Massachusetts understand
We're
that.
going to leave it right there. This actually was the last round, and it went by really fast, of our question and answer part of our debate. Now move to closing statements, and each candidate will have 1 minute for their submissions. I'm going to ask you to please stay to your times. Martha Coakley, you're going to go first in your closing statement.
So thank you. I do think for voters that this is going to be about values, choosing a leader for the next governor of Massachusetts who will make decisions based upon good investments in our people and our workforce and on the issues that people need help with, including mental health. Many of you have heard me talk about my brother. I'm not going to repeat the whole story tonight, but growing up in North Adams, he showed signs of depression, and after my folks were gone, he would get no help. He had a stigma attached to it, and he took his life 18 years ago this month. I think we need more help for behavioral mental health problems here. I'm committed to doing that. On a happier note, I also know we've made great progress in education. It's one of the things really important to me. Visiting Malden High School not too long ago, kids there, first generation, speak 70 languages. They were learning coding from their teacher, Paul Marks, and they said, Mr. Marks teaches us how to walk, and we learn how to fly.
And I thought that's what we want for all of our teachers and our kids here in Massachusetts, to take part in what can be a great opportunity for Massachusetts to be prosperous and fair. Thank you very much.
Mr. Baker, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Thank you very much. I want to thank WLP, and I want to thank the people of Springfield for turning in this evening. This is a great state. It's filled with wonderful people. I see them every day as I travel around the Commonwealth and have an opportunity to talk to them about their hopes and their dreams and their worries and their fears. But we need to do more to create jobs. We need to do more to make sure we have great schools in every community, and we need to do more to bring the kind of bipartisan balance to Beacon Hill that has been so lacking for the past few years. I want state government to work. I want it to work for the people who pay the bills, and I want it to work for the people who depend on the services that are provided by the Commonwealth. And as a former local official and a former state official and a healthcare executive who took a plan from receivership to #1 in the country, I think I have the skill set and the ability to get the job done and to deliver the kind of great Commonwealth that the people of this state deserve, as thrifty and as hardworking and as creative as they are. Thank you very much.
And that completes our 22 News Candidates Debate. Again, our thanks to Charlie Baker and to Martha Coakley. Thank you very much for coming here to our 22 News studios in Chicopee and letting our viewers and voters know how they stand on the issues here in Western Massachusetts and statewide. And thank you for watching tonight and caring enough to be a better informed voter. A reminder that elections are now a dozen days away, and 22 News will bring you complete coverage election night with up-to-the-minute results after the polls close, both here on 22 News and online at WWLP.com. Thank you and good night.